of Parliament and the Assistant to the Clerk, in particular Mr. Eastman, Mr. Jones, and Ms. Hamlin, and let the record show that this 843 pages of record did not come about by the twiggling of a nose by a woman called Elizabeth Whitby Rich. But it came about as a result of many, 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 many hours of hard work in order to put this country at a different level with respect to good governance, with respect to expecting more from myself in the mirror and from each and every one of you. And if we start from the premise that this is asking of each of us to move to a different level, then we begin to understand that this is for the better. Now, I want equally to be very clear that regulatory breaches ought not to be confused with substantive breaches of corruption. And regulatory breaches, for now, are intended to be covered by fines and penalties until such time as the Attorney General brings to this Parliament the paper on civil penalties, so that we can leave imprisonment for what imprisonment really ought to be left for, which is substantive breaches of the criminal law. But we need to move to a situation where we leave Queen Victoria in the 19th century, where she reigned, and come to the 21st century with penalties that make sense without seeking to make men and women criminals for regulatory breaches. Men and women must pay a penalty for disorder. Men and women must pay a penalty for not doing the right thing. But I don't know that we want in this day and age to make people criminals for regulatory breaches, because it runs counter to the kind of society and the kind of opportunities that we want to be able to give our people in this country. I am conscious, Mr. Speaker, that today requires of me a number of speeches that will speak to the essence of who we are as a people. A government has not come simply to be part and parcel of the process of taxation and executing regulatory issues, but fundamentally it is also about who we are as a people and what we can do as a people together. Now, Mr. Speaker, against that background, let us be clear that there are people in the private sector who are as corrupt as the ones who want to be accused or that they want to accuse in the public sector. And that who the cap fit must wear it. Who the cap fit must wear it. And that this notion that it is only politicians who are corrupt is a nonsense and is not supported by the evidence either locally or internationally. Are there politicians who have been corrupt? Surely there have been. Are there going to be politicians again corrupt in life? Regrettably, there probably will be. But are there other human beings in the private sector or other human beings at different stations in life who have chosen to try a thing and who believe that they are not doing anything wrong because they have not been caught? Let's get real. All of us in here know that attitude. I get away with it. I get through. Therefore, I mean, it's not a problem. Without recognizing that if everybody takes that get away with it, get through attitude, that the cumulative impact on what a government can then do, I would wish today that we would be in a position of not having to go and borrow as much money as we have to go and borrow for water mains and for augmentation of water if we had taken a different approach. I would wish that we were not in a position where we had to and could only buy 40-something of the electric buses because we didn't spend $28 million on transmissions over a 10-year period. And I'm not going to go any further because I believe that the Leader of the Opposition is doing his job, and thank you, sir, for doing it with respect to that matter in the Public Accounts Committee. Thank you. I would wish that I could go on a number of things throughout the history of this country. It didn't start now. And will we be able to remove it from the landscape? I hope so. But are we sanguine and practical enough to know that the battle against corruption is a hard battle? Because the first thing we have to stop is larceny in your heart. And when we stop with larceny in your heart, then the next thing we stop with is larceny in your hands. And why? Because all we do is unfair the next body, unfair our neighbor, unfair the next group of people who were hoping that this would be their point of salvation and their opportunity to get on the train and to move themselves out of poverty, to move themselves out of denial of opportunity, because there's a cost to all of these things. There's only a finite amount of money, and if you spend the money here supporting people who shouldn't be getting it, then you can't spend it here where you need to spend it to fix schools, to create opportunities and to buy equipment in the hospital, to do the things, to be able to expand how much we pay for pensions, how much we pay in benefits, how much we give to welfare. There's only one pot. And this is the kind of mature conversations. And then the other larceny in your heart is taken with the stealing of time, the stealing of other things that we know that if we want to be world class, that if we want to give ourselves the best chance to be insulated against the body blows of an international community that is not seeing us, not hearing us because we're just too small, and that we have to do the things to be able to merit and demand audience. If we want to do those things that can sustain the quality of life that we have become accustomed to and to carry it to a different level, then, my friends, we are in this family into conversation mode. This is family time, and this is time for talking. Because it is only when we talk as a family that we make sure that our members don't go out and embarrass us. And if they do go and embarrass us, it's either spiteful or they need help. If they need help, come and let us get it for you. And if it is spitefulness, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Romans. Mr. Speaker, I ask this honorable chamber, therefore, to let us move to a new chapter in the life and in the affairs of this nation. It is not going to be easy. It is not going to be comfortable. I give this country the assurance that when this bill passes, both houses, that there will be a period of gestation of 9 months in order to be able to ensure that we will train everyone who is likely to be affected by this bill. We will use that parallel period to also bring into function the commission in terms of the planning arrangements for it, such that when the proclamation for its actual application is made, and whether that comes on the 1st of March or 1st of April or 1st of May or 1st of June, whatever date, the reality is the country will be notified after we meet with Cabinet Office, after we meet with the Attorney General's chambers, after we meet with the Director of Finance and Economic Affairs and the Head of the Public Service, because I do not believe that we should hold people accountable without public education. It is, and while ignorance of the law is no excuse for lawyers, in the practical world of non-lawyers, ignorance of the law means a hell of a lot. It means you don't know the law. And that if told the law, you might well be prepared to put aside what you were planning to do. And I don't mean from the point of view of larceny, because if you got larceny in your heart, you got larceny in your heart. I mean from the point of view of complying with the declarations, ensuring that you do not find yourself in collision with this piece of legislation, because it now imposes new standards and new obligations on a whole range of people, hundreds of people that hitherto would not have been subject to it. Everybody hears about the politicians. Everybody hears about the 30 of us in here. And possibly even they sometimes forget about the 21 in the Senate. They focus on the 30 in here. But the 30 in here cannot by themselves absolve this country of any of those things on its own. This is a societal issue. It is being borne and carried to the forward by the majority who are on the front lines of public life. But let us also get real. Every single politician in here, their family is now known as a political exposed person, otherwise called PEP. And it means that many transactions that your sister or your father or your aunt or spouses or whoever or partners or whoever, all of a sudden, they're affected. And therefore, the participation in public life carries with it a heavy, heavy, heavy burden. And that is going to ultimately, if we are not careful, start to affect the persons who come to public life who do not want to be able, even if they accept themselves, the willingness of such high scrutiny to participate, willingness to participate under such high scrutiny. There are those in their family who want nothing at all to do with politics, who are now captured by the wide net of the world. And at some point, the world is going to have to make sure that two wrongs don't make a right. And that in so carrying it so wide that you don't exclude a whole range of people who would otherwise serve. Now, ironically, that was the point at which the former Prime Minister David Thompson stopped the process of this bill, having committed to it. Committed to it before 2008. And when asked in 2010 why it hadn't come yet, early on, end of 2009, early 2010, I can't remember, he made the point that, like Trinidad, that there was a recognition that a lot of these things in here were now reducing the number of persons who wanted to voluntarily serve in public life. Now, we are very clear that people's personal affairs will not be the subject of public scrutiny or public advertisement. Not in that at all. That would be a witch hunt beyond which we would never be able, from which we would never be able to recover. But what we do is to ensure that those who are under a duty of confidentiality have the ability to review and to ensure that there is no improper gain or unreasonable accumulation of wealth that cannot be explained. And that's all this is intended to do. It's also intended to bring order to the receipt of gifts. It is intended to bring order as well to those things that could not otherwise be explained by reason of how you've gotten it. So that, and we started this bill as well, I must tell you, for example, with whistleblower provisions and other things, but we took a determination that separate legislation will come for that, just as separate legislation is coming for corruption and for corruption and terrorism related activities. And now this morning we've added separate legislation for the judicial conduct, for high conduct, assuring the high conduct of judicial officers. Mr. Speaker, I believe this government is doing its job and its duty by the people of this country. It's not an easy war. And not only are we correcting the things of the past, but we are seeking to be consistent with the values which we believe in. Last week, Tuesday morning, I happened to be privileged enough to participate in an event called RISE at the United Nations with the former president of Liberia and with the wife of both the former, she was the wife of the former president of Mozambique, and she subsequently became the wife after his death of the president of South Africa. She's otherwise known in Africa as Mama Grassa, but Grassa Michelle. And I commend that speech to all who are interested in the affairs of man. I felt humbled to be present and to listen to her. And in the few minutes that she spoke, one of the things that she said And in fact, I'm going to get a transcript of the speech and make it a document of this House. So worthy is it of our attention. And she said that the values that carried us through the last century cannot be the values that carry us through this century. She indicated that inequality is a man-made construct. Inequality is man-made, and we know it. And it's man-made because the choices that we make reinforce inequality or reverse inequality. And inequality requires resources to reverse it. And in the requirement of resources, we must shepherd that which we have appropriately by ensuring that a lot of it is not siphoned off, or none of it is siphoned off for the purposes for which it was not intended, the purposes for which it is against the law. And it is against that background, Mr. Speaker, that I therefore am assured that this government is doing the right thing in the passage of this bill. I thank all members as I close who allowed us to reach this point. And I say so conscious that in this small nation of ours, to have had the level of participation that this bill had, to have had the level of consideration that this bill had, it puts it in a unique space in the post-independence affairs of this nation with respect to the level and quality of consultation, but equally as important, with the changes that the government have taken on board to improve it in the same way, Mr. Speaker, that we did with the other things since coming to office, like the reform of our state-owned enterprises, when we had the large numbers of persons helping us with the determination in the summer of 2018 as to which enterprises are essential, highly desirable, or optional. Or as we did with the BOSS program, where we took an initial program put forward by the government and improved it considerably through consultation with the social partnership. Mr. Speaker, this is who we are. This is how we do our business. And I thank you, and I commend with this resolution, therefore, Mr. Speaker, the tremendous work and the report of the Joint Select Committee of both Houses of Parliament of Barbados with respect to the Integrity in Public Life Bill 2018, which will now change. The process, as I understand it, is that that bill, which was initially laid, once this resolution passes, will now be withdrawn, and that immediately upon the passage of this resolution, I shall, with the assistance of the clerk, be asking that the new bill do pass this chamber in all of its stages thereafter. Mr. Speaker, I am obliged to you. I am proud to be in this nation, in this assembly, at this time, to move a resolution that allows us to move to a new page in the governance of our affairs as a nation. I'm obliged to you, sir. Yes.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this resolution do now pass.
Question is that the aforementioned resolution be now passed. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This resolution stands passed.
Order number 1, sir.
What did he second reading? What did he second reading? Yeah. What did he second reading?
Order number 1, in the name of the Honourable Prime Minister, to resume debate on the second reading of the Integrity in Public Life Bill 2018.
Mr.
Honourable
Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, there is no need for any substantive debate on this. All who have been following know that a report of 843 pages led to the production of this new bill, and to that extent I beg to move that this bill be now read a second time. I'm not sure whether...
Honourable Member for St. Michael West, Leader of the Opposition.
Was there a second to that?
You seconded the bill?
Was there a second to that? No. If there's a second to that, I will speak after.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just simply to say, if the bill is coming back here, and especially in such a large volume of words and pages, perhaps I should put on record I'm not absolutely comfortable with the fact that we will want to pass it today in all of its stages. I really think some time ought to be taken or given for a perusal of the bill in its new iteration.
As I wind up the debate in the second reading, Mr. Speaker, I regret that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition feels that way, particularly since this report has been on the order paper of this House of Assembly. In fact, the last speeches were made in December last year or November last year. The last speeches were made more than 6-7 months ago. So I am not sure what is intended. Suffice it to say that this government does not want this on the road a year from now. And therefore, we have left it on the order paper for 7-8 months, that it was available for everyone to speak. In fact, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition was in a better position than me, because I was not a part of the committee. I have had to fight my way through all of the documentation in order to give the speech that I gave this morning. So I beg to move that this bill be now read a second time. Second time. I'm conscious that I'm sensitive to his concerns, but on this occasion, I believe that when I weigh it against the fact, and I say so with all sincerity, that it has been here for months, and secondly, that he was a full part of this process which started in the summer of 2018, in other words, 2 whole years ago, that we have more than given this bill ample circulation, ample opportunity for everyone in both houses of Parliament to be part and parcel of the process. And to that extent, I would prefer to err on the passage of this bill now, and if there are further amendments, I've already indicated that I would like, when the Attorney General brings the paper on civil penalties, to revisit this bill and other bills with respect to what I call regulatory breaches, which are different from substantive breaches of dishonesty. A regulatory breach is where you failed to file in time. A substantive breach is where you were actually dishonest. So to that extent, I therefore beg to move that this bill be now read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. They don't go, she going to move it to read a third time. She doesn't have. Yeah. Third reading. to break. You have to- No. No. Right. Yes, sir. It has to be a third time. Right. Yeah, Pedro. Okay. So- That's a good committee.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg that we revert to committee, please.
Beg to second that.
You gotta leave it here. You gotta put it here. You leave it here. You leave it here.
Beg to move that you do now leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee, sir.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
This House is now in committee.
Madam Chair, just to inform members that we're back in committee because of a few minor changes, because this bill would already have gone to a committee, which would have done most of the work, so we're not going to call all the clauses as customary. Clause 1, which deals with the structure of the bill, clause 1.
I beg to move that clause 1 be amended, Madam Chair, and reads as follows now. This act may be cited as the Integrity and Public Life Act 2020.
Question is that clause 1 be amended as already stated. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. We think the ayes have it.
The second schedule at part 2 of that schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that at part 2 of the second schedule, that number 7 be deleted, namely Barbados State Industry Corporation. That number 20 be deleted, Barbados Tourism Public Authority. That number 34 be deleted, Gymnasium Limited. And that number 44 be deleted, National Productivity Council. These are being deleted because they no longer exist at law, and can be therefore asked as well that all of the numbering in part 2 of the second schedule be renumbered as a result of the deletion of those 4 entities that no longer exist at law.
Question is that this part 2 of the second schedule, amendments be made to that part as mentioned. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg that you do now report progress to His Honour the Speaker. The passage of the bill, as amended, to His Honour the Speaker.
The question is that I do not report to His Honour the Speaker the passage of the bill as amended. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of committees has reported the passing of one bill with amendments.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
The question is that the aforementioned bill be read a third time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Integrity in Public Life Act 2020.
The question is that the aforementioned bill be now passed and so cited. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, this bill has to be passed in accordance with Section 49 of the Constitution. Therefore, we need to actually do a roll call and a voice vote. Marshal, we have a Ms. Motley,
Aye.
Mr. Marshall,
Aye.
Ms. Bradshaw,
Aye.
Mr. Payne, Mr. Simmons,
Aye.
Mr. Griffith,
Aye.
Dr. Duguid,
Aye.
Mr. Ford, Mr. Rowe,
Aye.
Mr. Hinkson, Your Honor, Mr. Clark,
Aye.
Ms. Ford, Reverend Appley, Mr. Weir,
Aye.
Mr. Abrams, Mr. Jordan, Mr. Strong,
Aye.
Mr. Phillips,
Aye.
Dr. Brown,
Aye.
Mr. Humphrey,
Aye.
Ms. Cattle,
Aye.
and Mr. King, sir.
Aye.
Mr. Speaker, 22 honorable members voted in favor of the bill. Therefore, the threshold of 2/3 having been met, the bill has been passed in accordance with Section 49 of the Constitution.
This bill now stands passed in conformity with the Constitution.
Mr. Speaker, revert to government notices.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of the Remote Employment Bill 2020.
Revert to first readings of bill.
Mr. Speaker,
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of the Remote Employment Bill 2020.
Question is that the aforementioned bill be read a first time. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Revert to government business.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You will see on the order paper, this bill is listed as order number 16. I beg to move that this bill now be substituted with order number 19.
The question is that order number 16 be substituted for order number 19. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Order number 19, sir. In the name of the Honorable Prime Minister of the Remote Employment Bill 2020.
Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise in this chamber conscious that the bill that is before this honourable chamber will speak many things to many people when the history of our country is written. It will speak to the fact that this bill is fundamentally a response to an intervening act of a pandemic in the affairs of the global community that has left bare almost all aspects of human and economic endeavor across the global community. When we started 2020, there were those of us who read a lot of news, listen to a lot of news, who in the back of our heads heard that there was a new virus that had been discovered and that there were concerns about it and that the Chinese government was trying to come to grips with it. As we got more into January 2020, it became clear the virulent strain of this particular form of coronavirus. And even as we speak some 7 months later, we are still learning about its characteristics, and regrettably, we are seeing before us its streak of destruction, from lives to families to livelihoods to nations to companies to communities. You know, as students in school, we read about the plague, the bubonic plague. We read about the Spanish flu. We read about these things that just decimated communities. But little did we know that we were going to watch it unfold before our very eyes. You know, every time I look at that screen on television, I pause and I reflect on the fact that when I spoke in this Parliament on the 20th of March, some 3-4 days after our first case of coronavirus, when I spoke in this House of Assembly to close the second reading of the appropriation bill and to start the process of right-sizing and to put some measures in place to ease the pain, to ease the strain on Barbadian businesses and households, we still didn't even recognize the scale of what we were likely facing. And I recall on the morning before I went for my own operation, looking and remembering that the United States of America at that time had 1,100 cases, deaths, 1,100 deaths. And as we speak today, the United States of America has over 140,000 people who regrettably have died from COVID-19. And we too, in Barbados, are reflective of the fact that we've probably had more Barbadians die outside of Barbados than we've had die within Barbados from this pandemic. So I don't need to go any further with respect to that aspect of it. The other thing is that the economic implosion, because you can't call it a recession, but the economic implosion that is taking place globally as a result of the impact of restricted movement and curfews and the cessation of air travel has meant that countries such as ours that are heavily tourism and travel dependent have been on the front line of the burden of adjustment and loss with respect to this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, it has not been easy. It has not been easy for countries like Barbados, who depend on the movement of people in and out, who depend on the movement of goods coming in very often, and who, by all measurements, we have been an open society for the majority of our modern existence. And we recognize that the cessation of air travel meant, therefore, that hotels, attractions, distributors, and let's get real, down to farmers and suppliers, were no longer going to be in a position to believe that they were operating business as usual, because at least 20% of the demand for goods produced in this country would have been contracted, would have been lost as a result of the failure of the country to be able to accept tourists in the normal way in which we are accustomed to so do. So that is why you saw the sale of chicken, the sale of pork at reduced prices, largely because the farmers would have produced for the normal population numbers, which is our domestic population, plus those who come here and visit. Barbados has more than twice its population visiting and staying with us as long-stay tourists every year. More than twice our population. And with respect to day tourists, cruise ship, almost 3 times our population. And when you take the two together, you get the staggering figure of 5 times our population visiting us and being on island cumulatively over the course of a 1-year period. When I put it this way, Mr. Speaker, you begin to understand what has happened with the demand for goods and services in the country, and why I do not use the word recession, but I use the word implosion. Because, Mr. Speaker, we have come to a point in the conduct of this nation's business where, regrettably, only those who live here and are now currently working are in a position to fuel this economy. That is in no way sufficient. And, Mr. Speaker, my government reflected on these matters and realized that part of the difficulty really comes from short stay tourism. Because in coming in, the Ministry of Health has made it absolutely clear that we will manage according to the risk of where persons are coming from. And that risk depends on the incidence of cases in the country from which you're traveling. It doesn't depend on your nationality. I could be from Timbuktu. And if Timbuktu has no cases, that's great. But if I'm from Timbuktu and they got cases in the United States of America that is now seeing cases outstrip even the capacity of their health system in many states, then we have a high-risk scenario. I can be an American in Timbuktu, and if Timbuktu has no cases, then the fact that I'm an American in Timbuktu does not preclude me from coming to Barbados if I'm coming from Timbuktu. So that the risk attaches itself not to nationality, but to the location from which the person is coming and where they have been in the last 21 days. And we make that very, very clear in the conduct of our protocols, in the management of our protocols. Similarly, those coming from a low-risk area do not experience the same things as those that come from a high-risk or medium-risk country. Those that come from a low-risk country will not be required to stay in quarantine, in a way that those who come from a high-risk country must stay in some form of state-approved quarantine, whether it is the free one that the public purse is paying for, or it is a hotel that the individual will have to pay for, and it is a hotel that has been approved by the public health and the environmental health officials. In other words, not every hotel can satisfy. Or it is a villa that has been approved by the officials. Or in some instances, where it is a residence where persons are living alone and are in a medium risk or a low risk category, can be monitored from there. Mr. Speaker, this has been a trying exercise. And there's not a human being on this earth, man or woman, who can tell you that they know where to go because they know the answers. Because the one sure thing is that the world is learning day by day by day by day. We didn't think that certain things applied at the beginning. We now learn that they apply now. So that this has been a learning exercise. And the one thing that has kept us safe and has been that we have followed the science and that we have followed the advice of those officials who are schooled in this area and who, when cross-examined, can give us the answers that will allow us to make sensible policy with respect to where we are going. Now, Mr. Speaker, I start from this perspective because years from now, people must understand why did this government introduce a bill called the Remote Employment Act. And it is simply this, that if you are going to impose quarantine on people, it means that short-term tourism is out of it. Nobody is going to leave where they are living and come for 4 or 5 days or a week, as is the case with more than half of the tourists who come to Barbados historically now, to come to us. But because Barbados has been able to achieve as a people, all of us, and I thank the people of this nation again, although we're going to have some conversations later this week with respect to some slippages. I ask us to reflect on the fact that that reputation for safety and biosecurity is now going ahead of us. And that already in the last few months, Mr. Speaker, there were a number of people who chose to sit out the pandemic in Barbados because they felt safer. And they didn't also want to go back to a cold climate in many instances, where in living in that cold climate, whether it is true or not, people tend to feel that it is easier to breathe in this kind of climate outdoors than if you're in a basement somewhere in a cold, grimy, damp climate. Now, Mr. Speaker, the government therefore came upon the concept of a Barbados 12-month Barbados welcome stamp. And let us contextualize it. The average tourist that comes here will get 3 months normally to stay. And in many instances, can be extended for 3 months. When they're here for that 3 or 6 months, they are deemed non-resident naturally for tax purposes, so there's no issue. The average person at a certain level who works for themselves or any senior level manager invariably walks with their laptop or iPad. And in walking with those, what are they doing? With the best will in the world, I can tell you that even when I take vacation, it ain't really vacation, because at least for a few hours of the day, you are there answering, doing things, keeping the wheels going. And it's no different with others. But what we want to do now is to formalize it and say, look, many of you are working from home already. Many of you are using the technology, whether it is Zoom or WebEx or Microsoft Teams or whatever it is that we have now come to be able to keep the conduct of business going, while at the same time ensuring that you are not put at risk because of the volume of telework and technological platforms that we're using to facilitate that telework. So that, Mr. Speaker, we recognize that in some instances, why do it from up there? Why not do it from down here? Why not do it and be able to go to the beach in the morning before you work or in the evening before you sleep? Why not do it and still have access to good restaurants? Why not do it and still have access to being able to play outdoor sports in a country that is relatively safe and that has, most importantly as well, taken the precautions to amplify the capacity of its healthcare system to meet the eventualities of not only its immediate domestic population, but also those who visit us. Mr. Speaker, the Crane Hotel was built in the 19th century. The Crane Hotel, where the Crane is now, that hotel was built in the 19th century. This coast here, Mr. Speaker, the South Coast, was the subject of the location of guest houses and residents that persons coming from Brazil and Latin America used to frequent in the early 20th century. Now, I give this example because when they came to Barbados, they didn't come for 7 days. They came invariably for 2-3 months. And those who throughout the years would be coming to Barbados for our climate also came for long periods of time. We take pride in carrying people to George Washington House and reflecting on the fact that the only country in the world that George Washington visited outside of his own was Barbados, because he had to bring his brother here because his brother had respiratory problems, and Barbados's climate was perfect for them to recuperate, for the brother to recuperate from his respiratory problems. It is of note that when he wrote back to his family and friends in the United States of America, I'm told that he spoke about how progressive and modern Barbados was in that day and age. And we all know that it was largely because, yes, they had theater here. Why? Because the British had a plantocracy that was resident in this country. That the British had great houses and all of the amenities that go with those great houses and all of the things to keep them comfortable. And hence, Barbados, even though it was practicing the institution of slavery, was allowing and admitting for a form of entertainment and livelihood for others, as if it was right to have two different categories of human beings in this one same space. Today we would say we cannot breathe. We could not breathe. Unfortunately, fortunately, the actions of substantive generations to fight what was clearly a wrong thing. And in this chamber, in the last few speeches, I've had to speak to it over and over and over. Because what COVID has done has been to lay bare, as the Secretary General of the United Nations said this weekend in his Nelson Mandela speech, lay bare all of the inequities and all of the fragilities of human life and human endeavor as a result of this thing called COVID-19. And it goes further. It was as if, as he said, you use an X-ray machine, and the X-ray machine has literally shown you all of the fragilities of the society in the most blatant of ways. And we know it. Where there was poverty, it seems to be greater than it was. Where there was discrimination, it seems to be more egregious than it ever seemed. Where there was weakness, it seems to be more frail than it ever was. And it has brought us to a point in human existence where we are not only counting the cost of COVID, we are learning the worth and value of COVID. The worth and value of COVID taught us that families matter. COVID has taught us that relationships matter. It has taught us that work relationships and work itself matters. Matters for mental wellness, not just physical support. It has taught us that communities matter. It has taught us that relationships between countries matter. That the notion that there can be one set of countries left to suck salt and not be able to access medication, not be able to access the people's vaccine, is something that in the 75th year after we have established the United Nations, we have to ask ourselves, is this the world that was intended to be when we created the United Nations 75 years ago, to give people opportunity and to remove all of the scourges of discrimination from us? Is this the world that we now have? And if it is not, what will we do? Recognizing that inequality is man-made, recognizing that environmental degradation is man-made, recognizing that how we treat to our families, how we treat to labor, how we treat to relationships lies within our power. And Mr. Speaker, I am heartened by the response, the overwhelming response that the global community has given Barbados and Barbadians on the launch of this 12-month welcome stamp. It was almost as if they were waiting for somebody to say something. And let me contextualize it, because I have come to understand that the period of time for which we have been given responsibility for governance is not an easy time. And such is life. We were not asked to simply be the government of good times. We were asked to be the government. And being the government means facing whatever conditions and circumstances we must face. And it is against that background, sir, that when asked in March what would be our stance to people who were helpless or voiceless, that this country took a determination and made a determination, and I want to commend all around us, members of Parliament, members of the national community, that when we said to the people who were stranded on the cruise ships and when they had nowhere to turn to and no one to turn to, and when they showed up and showed us all of the ports that said no entry, that we said, come, we know better. We're not that kind of person. We know better. We will put arrangements in place to guarantee their safety, but to guarantee the safety equally of our citizens. And over the course of the last few months, Mr. Speaker, I am happy to lead a nation that has been responsible for the repatriation of more than 21,000 human beings from cruise ships to the countries from which they have come. And if you know what it is to move 21,000 people, you will understand why I want to strongly commend the Bridgetown Port, the Ministry of Maritime Affairs, the Minister, the Chairman, and all of the others who would have worked with the port agents, the ship agents, the people at immigration, the people at Port Health, the people at the security, customs guards, customs, all of the various people, the people at air traffic control, the people, nurses who had to help in some instances, and Port Health doctors to take samples. I want to thank and commend all of you because we have shown what it is to be mature and to be able to do the right thing by ourselves, first and foremost, because we must always be able to look in the mirror and love who we see. But secondly, to do the right thing by those with whom we have a relationship. And people will judge us, not from what we do in good times alone, but from the decisions that we make in difficult times. And therefore, when I say to you that the kind of country that we are leading, the kind of ethos that we have developed, these things matter. And there are discussions and debates that we're going to have to continue to have in the country. As I said, this is no family time. And it's no different from how we treat to our family in our household, and around the kitchen table, around the dining room table, around in the living room, in the veranda, out in the garage, on the lawn, wherever, out under the tree with the fellas. It is family time. And it is no time to talk. And there's some difficult things that we're going to have to talk about. But the one thing we know, because we more than any other, know what it is not to be able to breathe. We. And if black men say that they don't know alone, I can tell you that black women know it. We know what it means not to breathe. And I said, and have said consistently, that people who know what it is to feel the tinge of discrimination cannot in any other way now be the sponsors of discrimination. And Mr. Speaker, I'm so clear on this, but it means that there are going to be difficult moments. And one of those difficult moments has presented itself today with this matter. There's an issue as to who Barbados will welcome and who it will not welcome. Well, I want to say that as long as I am Prime Minister of this nation, we welcome all, everyone. And that this country that has been forged, regrettably, in the bowels of discrimination, cannot now want to discriminate against anybody for any reason. All must breathe. All must breathe in this world. All must breathe in this country. And to that extent, Mr. Speaker, the incident which, and we get it, there are difficult discussions that we must have as a nation, and now is not the time to have those discussions. But what I do know is that the member for St. Peter has a bill before this honourable chamber that says that there shall be no discrimination on any grounds in the workplace. And that debate will probably start later today. No discrimination on the grounds of race. No discrimination on the grounds of age. No discrimination on the grounds of color. No discrimination on the grounds of gender. No discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation. And the people that want to put us in a box that will allow people to be discriminated against for any reason, Mr. Speaker, that is not who we are. We are not that person. We are not that person. And we've never been. You know, the irony is that this country has welcomed people for decades and centuries without being that person. This country has made people feel comfortable. And I am not going to be part of any communication that suggests that Barbados is trying to be half of who or what it is, and that we are sponsoring discrimination or phobias of any type, Mr. Speaker. And I say so, therefore, conscious that the bill which is now before this House will not in any way, and for us to recognize that a person has a partner is not for us ourselves to be doing anything else, but we will also have the discussion in the context of COVID as to whether it is acceptable for us to discriminate against that boy or girl out there in laws of administration. Somebody dies. To whom does the house go? This is a country that recognizes unions other than a marriage because it said that you could not discriminate against people because of the fact that there was a union other than a marriage, because more than 70% of the people born in this country come from what? Come from unions other than a marriage. This is the parliament that said that the notion of calling someone an outside child or calling someone a bastard, it must be removed from our language. This is the country that said that because you were the first child of a man that subsequently, or a woman that subsequently married, that you should not be precluded or excluded from inheriting any part of the estate. This is a country that now has a female head of state representing another female head of state, a female head of government. This is a country that is wanting to say, look, it is not mine to judge. It really is not mine to judge. That is for the Lord. That is for you and your God, whoever that God is. But what we do know is this, that the laws of the land must not act as a scourge on the lives of human beings. The laws of this land must not act as an inhibitor to opportunity for our citizens. We are going to bury next week a man of distinguished and impeccable capacity, a man whose talents are recognized globally, but who, when he was born, did not have any claim to any particular station in life. Are we now to say that he is not and was not to have been welcome in certain places because of the color of his skin or because of the absence of pedigree according to class by those who feel that they are landed gentry? What would have happened to the world if we didn't have Everton Weeks? What would happen to the world if they lost the genius of Sir Garfield Sobers, our national hero, because of the station of his birth? Or Rihanna, who grew up in Westbury Road? Let us get real. And I pray things happen for a reason. The world is finding itself coming to grips with this issue of discrimination because of the horror of the knees of a man on the neck of another man. And I deliberately put it that way because I didn't say the knees of a black man or a white man, or the neck of a black man or a white man. Because once I say the knees of a man on the neck of a man, all of us know instinctively it is wrong.